Hello and welcome to an entirely new season of Help Me Buy Property podcast. My name is Moxin and Reza, and I could not be more thrilled to kick off season 3 with all of you. Now, first, let me say a massive thank you to each and every one of you who have been listening over the past 2 years. This support has been tremendous, and we've been able to build a massive and thriving community of property enthusiasts, seasoned investors, and everyone in between. Now, together we have dissected the property market time and time again, the market trends, unraveled the complexities that offers through property investing, and empowered countless listeners who are jumping in for the first time or taking that next step into property investment journey. So what's in store for season 3? Let's talk about that. Get ready for the season packed with inspirations, packed with insights and information, the success stories that can prove anyone can achieve their property dreams for sure. In season 3, in 2025, we are going to talk about market trends. We are going to talk about, what's shaping our Australian property market, but we are going to also talk about prediction secrets. We are going to bring to you or explore untouched avenues of property investing journey, those hidden gems that you've been waiting for, those stories that are exciting, are enticing, and everything in between. And of course, we'll continue to deliver everything relating to property, from the tips for first home buyers to advanced strategies for seasoned investors. So if you're just starting up, I would ask you humbly to go back and listen to season 1 and 2. But season 3 is here to showcase what you have learned in season 1 and 2, and this is all about the application. So whether you're just starting or you have your property portfolio on the belt, this season is for you. So buckle up for that deep dive into the fascinating world of property investing. And without further ado, let's start rolling. With investors, I always say this out loud, that there could be a lot of self-serving bias here as well, right? You see a lot of social influencers these days who would have 30, 40, 50,000 following, and they call out a suburb, and all you need is 100 good sales in a particular suburb for you to move the median, right, these days. So you need to be very careful about what are you targeting. Are you following owner occupiers who are delivering mature, consistent growth versus that story of, hey, where it's a short-term growth where it might turn off if the quarantine decides to close down again, right? So you're listening to Help Me Buy Property podcast, powered by Investor Partner Group. We help improve lifestyles by building scalable and sustainable generational wealth and passive income streams. We do this via our ecosystem that is a one-stop shop to all property investment needs, from evidence-based, data-driven buyers agency, industry-renowned portfolio reviews and property strategies, property development with and for clients, tax, SMSF, business structures advisory, and cash flow real estate. Everything we do is to help people achieve financial independence and not just basic financial freedom by using property as a tool and as a medium. Presently, we've launched Australian Property Academy, where we are training and teaching buyers agents, property advisors, property strategic partners, and secrets to finding investor-grade properties to astute investors. Connect now to experience it yourself, or drop in a line below at info@helpmebuy.com.au to get more information. Be kind and happy investing. Hello and welcome to another episode of Help Me Buy Property podcast. Today's podcast is an interesting one because we have one of Australia's leading property, should I say analyst or leading property veteran in-house today. We are inviting or bringing in John Lindeman. John regularly provides presentations, commission reports, research services across various different natures and directions of residential property markets for property industry leaders. Now, this episode is packed with John talking about his experience in the research and the dynamics of the housing market. But wait till the very end. We are going to talk about where are we seeing the market going in 2025, the key areas of opportunities, the LGs, the suburbs. So stick to the very end and listen to the whole podcast. Let's do the drum roll and bring John in. John, how are you today?
Hi, Mas. I'm good and very happy to be here. It's the first time we've done one of these, so I'm really looking forward to it.
And look, I've always enjoyed a lot of your blogs and the posts and those emails that I wait for. And we've been working over the last few months together with us. It's been quite exciting and entertaining. But what I want to do for you viewers and listeners is provide a bit of backstory, because your backstory is amazing. Like, I love it. There is such a warmth experience that is there. Everyone talks about data and everyone talks about property, but like, talk us through, like, what, 20, 30 years in this space now?
Professionally, about 20 years. But before then, I've been a property investor for over 40 years. That's a long time. But I started off not being a very good one, because I was lucky with the first property I bought in Melbourne. It was a terrace house, and it doubled in price in 4 years. And I
Amazing.
thought, oh, yeah.
Where was this, in Melbourne?
In Hawthorne, yeah. And I thought, property investing, that's the way to go. I didn't realise it was the market movements that had caused that price growth. And then I sold that property. We bought another one around Bayside, and it didn't go up at all in the next 4 years. In fact, it went backwards, and we had to move, and I had to sell it at a loss. And I thought, I just don't understand how the market really works. So I read every book I could find on property investing. I went to webinars, podcasts, boot camps, learned as much as I could, but I discovered that no one could actually tell me how the market worked and how investors could get the most benefit.
Yeah.
So at that time, I'd finished my professional education, and I went to work at the Bureau of Statistics. So that was 20 years ago. I learned about this thing called trend analysis, and I thought, well, they applied this to stocks and commodities. And I thought, well, you could probably apply that to the property market as well. And then I joined Residex. I became the head of research there for 5 years. And I started to apply the ideas of looking at trends to the property market, looking at all the different indicators. And I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of different ways you can assess the property market in terms of prices and listings and rental vacancies, and so it goes on. But then in 2008, we had the global financial crisis. And the banks came to me, Moss, and they said, look, we're really worried here because we think housing prices might actually fall. This was something that nobody had thought could happen. They were petrified. And so they said, can you work out which leading indicators will tell us whether or not prices are going to fall in any suburb? Yeah. So I did a lot of work with some of the big banks, and I worked out exactly how you could use the indicators to work out which suburbs were likely to fall in value. And then I went to my boss and I said, hey, I've figured out this system that allows us to work out where falls are going to occur. And he said, well, that's no value to us. Can you work out the opposite, where prices are going to go up? And I said, yes. And I actually decided at that point to part ways with Residex because I thought this information is too valuable to share with someone else.
Of course, yeah, 100%.
Yes,
and I remember GFC as well. Like, I started my journey in the year of GFC, so 2008-9. So there was so much negativity. Like, the confidence was completely shattered. Everyone was talking about this doom and gloom, right? And I was working for one of the companies that potentially caused GFC, which is AIG. And so new job. And as soon as I heard about this GFC. And so at the brink of losing the job and getting the first mortgage, it was just an amazing time. I still reflect and see. I think one of my biggest learnings at GFC was that, geez, I didn't buy enough, right? Because everyone was like, oh, the market is going to tank, the market is going to go, I think. But one of the key learnings always has been that it's the best time to invest in the market is when everyone says it's not the best time to invest, right? Because then you can cherry pick whatever you want if the right stock, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And there were big, well-known experts out there. The chief economist at AMP saying that house prices were going to fall by 40% in Australia. And a number of academics made the same prediction. And I could see from the data that was simply not going to happen. When you looked at the number of sales, the number of listings, everything was fundamentally sound. And so I then, having worked out this method, which is highly accurate, I was awarded an innovation patent. So we set up a database which covers every single suburb in Australia. We look at houses, units, and this database can predict price growth potential up to 5 years into the future. It's protected by the patent. I've had a lot of imitators. A lot of people read my books. I've had a number of books published, and they read them and say, "Oh yeah, we can do that." And in theory, yes, you can. Anyone, if you've got the information and you've got access to all of that data, yes, you can predict the future. But it's not easy, and it took us quite a few years to get to that point where we could predict with a reasonable degree of confidence.
Yeah.
Don't get yourself taken on a ride by property spookers, so-called property investment advisors, or buyer's agents who are selling house and land packages or off-the-plan properties or apartments. Get yourself a copy of this book called The Millennial's Guide to Property Investing. This book is not just for millennials. The title suggests, but it's actually the most advanced way of investing in property. This book will relate to your clients, your colleagues, and other business owners. There are so many property spookers out there who have come out of the woodwork over the last 3 to 5 years, and there is so much misinformation out there that I had to write a book about all the F-ups that people can actually avoid in order to be super successful in their property investment journey. Some of these are really easy to identify, but they are so costly to fix once these mistakes are made. So it's a short book, it's easy to read, it has a lot of stories, it has a lot of examples, and it is a true guide for people who wants to do it themselves. My name is Moxin Reza. This is my story, and a lot of you will relate to parts of this story if you're not born in the riches and if you're trying to build a property portfolio that can last generations and help you improve your lifestyle along the way. So I give you a chance to come out there and have a read. Be kind, stay safe, keep smiling, keep investing, and please do check out the book.
And look, if I take myself 10, 15 years, right, a lot of this data was not available to what the availability of the data set is right now, right? So I think more is not always better. I think more is more confusing sometimes as well. Like as a data scientist myself, we always tend to find more data, to find more correlations, to do better trend analysis, and that makes total sense. But like data can be good and bad at the same time. I can present the data in a way where it would make it look like everything is hunky-dory, and then the same data set someone else can use and present it in a very different way. So talk to me a bit about why do these experts get it so wrong, and what are your key learnings from all of this that has been happening in the data space?
I think the most important learning was that I saw that the housing market was predictable, and you could predict with reasonable accuracy down to individual suburbs. And so we were able to look, and one example of that was in our database, we noticed a sudden uplift in the number of sales occurring in a small town in southern New South Wales called Hay. And there was no reason for that. Why would the sales go up? And the reason was that Oscot, which is the cotton growers cooperative, had decided to build a cotton gin there, and they needed 160 workers. And so they started buying a few properties for the workers. And so I then looked at, well, what are the basic data figures you look at? How many rental vacancies were there in Hay? There were 3. And I thought, well, if 160 families are going to move in, rents are going to absolutely skyrocket.
Yeah.
How many properties are available for sale? And there was about 4.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that means that rents are going to go up through the roof, and that'll be followed by investors going in because the yields are going up to 10%. They'll buy properties for the yield, the cash flow.
Yeah.
What happened within 7 months, the median house price in Hay doubled. And that's the best results, we've ever achieved. I wish I could find more of those. It'd be great. But it was extraordinary. But it showed us the power of using the right data at the right time.
100%. And it's not, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I also see that people make is they think that the property data is mutually exclusive, whereas there is so much correlations between them. It's trends within trends, but it's also learning from between those trends too, right? The days on market on its own means nothing unless you see the trend and you compare it to a benchmark, right? A lot of people use this as a filtering mechanism, which I completely disagree with, right? They'll say, oh, the days of market needs to be X and the vacancy rate needs to be Y, and they have these dashboards with filtering in process. And I don't think that the filtering works. Where do you think that headspace is? Because as a data scientist, everything is about trends and the correlations between the trends, right? Whereas filtering is a point in time where you are just crossing the T's and crossing the suburbs out based on a filter. So how do you feel about that?
I agree entirely. And you can see that happening if you look at some suburbs where the median time on market might be 17 days, but you look a month ago, it was 10 days, and you think, well, hang on, that's gone from 10 to 17. That's a dramatic increase. If that trend continues, it's going to be 34 days and so on. And they, as you say too, Moss, they all work together. Some are leading, some are lagging. Lagging for sale prices will tell you what happened about 3 months ago, because that's when the sales occurred. Median time on market will tell you what's going on right now. And then the number of listings compared to sales, that trend will tell you what's going to happen in the future. So you can look at them all together and say, I can get a good picture here of which suburbs are likely to go up and which ones to get out of really quickly with a high degree of accuracy. And you don't need to look at, I mean, some people say, oh, we look at 80 different metrics. And I think, well, if you do that, you're going to get completely confused. They all contradict each other. You only need to look at the main supply-demand state of the market indicators.
And so if it's that simple, why do so many people get it wrong, John?
Well, I think with just what you said, they look at filters, they look at these 80 metrics, and they're looking at too much data which contradicts itself. But I think the main reason is that most experts simply don't understand the market. They look at it as if it's a commodity like, say, shares or whatever, and it's not, because 70% of people that own property are not investors. They're actually homeowners, and they don't buy and sell property for profit. They do it because they want to move to a better suburb and a bigger house. So they're not after profit or after rental yield at all. And that really means that if you're looking at it from the perspective of an investor, you can do a lot better. But it also means that suburbs don't always behave the way that people would expect them to, because it's about home owners that drive the market.
And I mean, with investors, I always say this out loud, that there could be a lot of self-serving bias here as well, right? You see a lot of social influencers these days who would have 30, 40, 50,000 following, and they call out a suburb, and all you need is 100 good sales in a particular suburb for you to move the median, right, these days. So you need to be very careful about what are you targeting? Are you following owner occupiers who are delivering mature, consistent growth, versus that story of, hey, where it's a short-term growth where it might turn off if the cotton gin decides to close down again, right? So,
Yeah, and it's also a lot of these people, what I call self-fulfilling prophecies. In other words, they predict something and so many people buy. Now, years ago when I was working at Residex, I was also writing a regular column for Australian Property Investor when it was a hard copy magazine, and I made a huge mistake. I predicted that this town called Weipa, which is up right in the far north of Queensland, would become the next Port Hedland, which was at the time the biggest booming town in Australia. The reason I made that prediction was because they were going to expand the port and bring in 2,000 workers, double the size of the town in a few months. So I predicted it was going to boom, and that was published, of course, in the paper. Thousands of people read the magazine article. And people flew up to Weipa, sort of get the whole plane loads full, buying anything they could. And Weipa boomed within a matter of months. And I thought, hang on, I just caused that. So I've made a conscious effort, never ever, to predict something to a large audience that could actually, what we call, make the market, where you're changing the dynamics. And so that we won't do that. Our reports, which we publish, are only available to a number of people who buy them. And I won't go out and say, hey, it's going to boom to millions of people, because you can be sure that's exactly what will happen.
What will happen? Yeah, 100%. And as I said, it takes a small number of cohort for you to change the median price of a particular suburb, right? So you don't need 1,000 sale in a suburb for it to move, right? So my analogy is that even if you have 100 people and each person pays an extra $1,000, with every sale coming through, that's an extra $100,000 that you would move the median by, right? It's as simple as that, right? So
And the other problem is that what you're doing is you're creating what we call a false boom.
Yes.
It's not genuine. It's not supported by genuine homeowner demand. It's simply by speculative investors. And they're the markets that tend to crash. And when we look at the big crashes that have occurred, it's nearly always been speculative investors going in buying properties where the demand is purely from them and not for people actually looking for accommodation.
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very important point that you make, right? So having said that, let's take this to the very end where we're talking about where are the key opportunities for 2025. Now, where do you see 2025 coming through? Let's keep it high level. So you're not talking about suburbs. Let's say they're keeping at a price point of 600 to 700. Where are the opportunities that people should focus on?
I think it's important there too, Moss, to look at the different types of buyers. What we've seen, for example, in Perth is it was an investor-led boom, same in Adelaide and to some degree in the northern Queensland cities. It's all investors now racing in buying properties. But within those cities, what you also get is what we call a ripple effect. So the price growth has moved up from the lower priced suburbs like Mandurah and Rockingham in Perth, or Elizabeth, Salisbury and Gawler in South Australia, Logan, Ipswich in Queensland. So it's moving up through the market. What I see happening in those cities where there's been so much 30, 40, 50% price growth in the last 2 years, that people are upgrading, they're buying better homes in bigger suburbs because they can afford to do so. And that reaches a point where you get to the top end of the market, 55 plus. People like me who's been in the same area for 20, 30 years. There's been no growth for a long time, and now suddenly prices have gone up dramatically and they're motivated to say, well, let's take the money and downsize to a much nicer area. So these, and of course, the federal government encourages this because you can put up to 600,000 as a couple from the sale of your family home into super when you downsize. So a lot of people, we just went over to WA a few weeks ago, and I went to a town called Busselton, which is about 2 hours south of Perth. And it's already happening. You can see there the number of people racing in buying properties, older people downsizing, and they're paying cash because they're selling their family homes in Doubleview and other high-level suburbs in Perth. Already now, Busselton's gone up by about 20%, but that's just the start of it. When we look at Adelaide, you look, where do people downsize when they retire? It's the Fleurieu Peninsula, and places like Port Augusta and Goolwa and those towns.
And Victor Harbour and all of these areas.
Yeah, exactly. I said Port Augusta. I meant to say Victor Harbour, sorry. What's happening there is that prices haven't gone up for 3, 4, 5 years. But now that same dynamic is starting to happen. And so I predict huge, if around 600,000-700,000, those Fleurieu Peninsula towns have got huge growth potential. And in Queensland, exactly the same phenomenon. The growth has occurred. It's rippled up through the Brisbane market. And we're now looking at places like Bribie Island and Hervey Bay, where there's about 10 suburbs in Hervey Bay, haven't had any price growth for years. You can buy a property 600,000-700,000, and the price growth potential is huge because...
Massive.
Yeah. You think people are selling a home for 2.5 mil in Brisbane, they're putting 600,000 in super, keeping a little bit for the overseas trip. They can afford to buy for double what prices are.
Definitely. And I think, these people, when they find the right property, they pay with emotions, right? So that's what I felt, that if it's a single story house, it's nicely built, yes, in a smaller town, but if it's a nice house with everything that they want, then they'll pay with the heart. They'll not shy away because they have so much money, right? And a lot of people naturally think that, if they have so much cash, why don't they go out and build? They don't want to wait 12 to 18 months for the build to happen. They are too risk averse of what's happening out in the market with builders, etc. And where the build prices are going these days, I personally feel with the data supporting this, that there has almost been 35 to 40% build price increase over the last 3 years. You compare that to established properties in similar markets, that disparity between established property versus brand new property for 2 years used to be around 20-25%. That sits at about 35% now, 35%. And so naturally, when people come back into some of these markets, they will feel that brand new properties do not make sense because the value proposition is not big enough, and they'll default to established properties and they'll push the price up. And so I totally agree. I think there is an owner-led boom that is right around the corner. Yes, investor-led booms are still focused on smaller price points, below 500 price point. But I think these bigger price point of 600 to 800 is where the market would see major shift over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. What about Melbourne and Sydney? Like, I know you've talked about all of these states and they've done amazingly well. Everyone is looking at Victoria right now. Where do you stand with Victoria and Sydney?
When I look at areas that have got boom potential, and right now a lot of so-called experts are saying Melbourne's going to be the next to boom, I look at the comparison between, say, Perth 3 years ago or Adelaide 3 years ago, what the median price was, the yield, the cash flow potential. And quite frankly, Melbourne's not really there yet, because although you can buy houses in Thomastown or those sorts, Jacana, those sorts of western suburbs for under 600,000, you can't get the yield that you need. And you need at least 6.5% yield just to cover the interest cost. So that means that demand is building and rent demand is building, because after all, Melbourne took 25% of all our overseas arrivals last year. That's a huge number of people, nearly all renters. So rent demand is escalating. It will flow into higher rents no matter what the government does. So maybe 6 months, a year from now, we'll start to see investors moving into those lower price suburbs, and we'll see the same sort of growth potential occurring there.
What about regional parts of Victoria? You see a lot of rent pressures building up where there is immense amount of land, but there are not developable land, and there are no developers looking around creating any land supply, which means that the stock is quite limited. And people who live in some of these pockets, they never tend to go away, right? They hold these properties for well over 25 years on an average hold period. So do you see any potential, because there is major infrastructure spending in some of these regional pockets in Victoria as well?
There is. It's not what I look at is the long-term performance. When I look at, say, Victoria, and look at Melbourne compared to Geelong and Ballarat and Bendigo, and Victoria is the most easy one to predict growth, because when Melbourne booms, Geelong follows, and then Ballarat and Bendigo follow after that. They never precede. In other states, like in, say, Queensland, you might get more growth in regional markets than you do in Brisbane. That's because Brisbane's only got 40% of the population of Queensland. But in Victoria, 80% of people live in Melbourne. It's the big market. It drives the rest. So if Melbourne starts to boom, you can be pretty sure that Geelong will follow, and Ballarat and Bendigo will as well. So that's sort of my top-down view of the market. But if somebody says Ballarat's about to boom, and there's no other sort of areas like Bendigo, Geelong or Melbourne that have boomed, I said, no, it won't.
It won't happen just in isolation. The whole thing needs to happen at the same time. But I think the price point is quite competitive. Like when you're looking at below 400 price point, there are a lot of opportunities in regional Victoria for people who are still chasing yields. And so you would see some of that investor activity that are building up in areas like Shepparton or Morvale or Tarleton. Some of these pockets are seeing a lot of investor activity, especially people chasing yields and rooming houses and co-living properties, etc. All of that stuff that is happening in some of these areas.
A lot of potential, but as yet unrealised.
Unrealised, yes.
I think, and you mentioned Sydney. Well, Sydney it's sort of at the lower end of the market, if there is such a thing. It's over $1 million for home value, but we're seeing constant price growth occurring at a fairly slow rate in the first home buyer suburbs. But the top end of the market, in fact, prices are going backwards. As they are in Melbourne. Toorak fell by 25% the last year, would you believe? It's quite extraordinary.
Crazy, right?
Yeah. So it's almost the opposite of what's occurring in Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. It will happen. That growth will move through the market. But Sydney is many years away from another boom, I would say.
Definitely. What do you think that one of the biggest mistakes is that the investors make when they're picking up some of these pockets or some of these suburbs?
I think that investors, the two biggest mistakes, they're sort of related. One is buying at the wrong time. I did a presentation over in Perth about 3 years ago, and I predicted that Perth's market was about to boom. And I said, now's the time to buy. But these people they said, no, it's not going to happen. And so nobody wanted to be the first to go in and actually in Perth and start investing in their own backyard. But the wrong time to buy would be 10 years before that, when all these people did buy and there was no growth for 10 years.
Yeah.
So they were very sort of gun shy because of what had happened with 10 years of no growth.
Yeah.
So the wrong time to buy is when there's no growth potential. In other words, you're buying in a market that may not shift for many years. And the indicators will tell you which suburbs are more likely to go up than others. And the second biggest mistake is not selling at the right time. And
Yes.
I'm an advocate of timing the market. I think you can do far better by buying at the right time and selling at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we've done. And I recommend look at the indicators. When they're going the wrong way, your listings increasing, sales decreasing, time on market increasing, and you see that trend happening, and it sort of reaches a tipping point where you say, right, it's time to get out before prices start to fall.
I think what people don't realize is that when you look at really long-term trends, like you talk about 15, 20-year trends, the returns that the property market offers has never changed over the last sort of 40 decades, right? Because the annualized growth remains exactly the same. And so what the timing the market does is you're basically catching the growth when it's actually happening, right? So you're shrinking down that, doubling the property prices over instead of 12 to 15 years. Even if you catch, say, 60% growth in the first 7 years or 6 years, it makes total sense for you to exit. A lot of people are scared of exiting is because they don't have the right structures. They are scared of paying too much taxes. They don't use SMSF or super to their advantage by capping their taxes, etc. So there's a lot of strategies in being a lot more tax efficient and playing the game better. Because everyone thinks that, I'm chasing 7-8% growth, but the markets, we all know, does not grow in linear fashion, right? You would get like 20% growth and then 30% growth and then nothing for 4 or 5 years. And so the closer you are to the growth curve, the better it is. So 100% I agree.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And every capital city has behaved in that way. And that's why I can't understand those people who say it's time in the market, you've got to go in for the long haul. And I said, but look at what happened. Perth went up, it doubled in price in 2 years, between 2008 and 10, then nothing for 10 years. And now these lower price suburbs have doubled again in a few years, and probably now there'll be nothing again for another 10. Same in Adelaide, the same in every major capital city. So growth occurs in short, sharp, really good spurts, growth spurts if you're in that market at the right time. And then it just does nothing for a long time. So always take advantage of timing because you'll be much better.
Definitely. And John, very important question. Where do people find you? What socially? Of course, don't share your address, your phone number, because people would actually stalk you. But where can people actually find you, John?
Well, we've got a website called Lindeman Reports. It's LINDEMAN Reports, one word, .com.au. If you go there, there's a lot of blogs, information about the property market, the services that we do provide. We provide a lot of services for buyers, agents and renovators and so on, which you won't find on our site, but you've got to go to people like Moss for that information, of course. But one thing we do offer is a free consultation, a 30-minute telephone conversation with me to answer your most pressing questions about the property market. It might be a property you hold or you think you're buying or whatever. I'm happy to answer those questions, and without any sort of sell. We're not trying to sell you anything. Just because we've got the information, we'd love to share it. So if you go to our Lindeman Reports website, look up free consultation, and you can book one there, Moss.
Thank you very much for sharing. And for viewers and listeners, if you want to reach out to John, you can always reach out via us at info@helpmebuy.com.au or jump on our socials. Share in the comments and share your views on where the market is heading. What mistakes have you made, or when did you start, or where do you think that the economics goes wrong, or what are your hot tips or areas of opportunities in 2025? It would be interesting to see and hear as to what you are, as viewers and listeners, thinking about some of these pockets. We would be having John as a standing guest in our podcast going forward, so there would be a lot more of John. So if you have any questions, comments, feedbacks, please feel free to drop it into our comments or our inbox. Thank you for listening to us today. This is John and Moss checking out. Adios.